Hey guys, welcome to the Abstract Podcast. What you will be hearing right now is the beginning of a new podcast segment, and for the sake of convenience, we have named it Abstract Conversations. So, the intention of this segment is multifold. Firstly, to understand how different people view films and literature, and secondly, to understand their individual processes of analyzing the same. And in the meantime, also receive some interesting recommendations and tips to widen our understanding of art in general. So, without wasting any more time, let's get right into our conversation.
Hello, Pranav. How are you? Firstly,
Fine, doing fine, yeah.
so Pranav,
Doing fine.
for the sake of the conversation to start, let's just talk about who you are and what you do currently.
Okay, so I'm a 25-year-old citizen of Mumbai, just one among the 1.5, 1.7 crore people of the city. But so I essentially am an engineer with a degree in computer science, and after that I wanted to be a film critic, but couldn't actually find my feet in that field because a lot of publications were shutting down, and I was also a bit apprehensive of how I would build my career there. So that is why then I did the next best thing is I tried to find out a middle path between, say, my creative pursuits and my creative passions and a career in business. So, or a career in corporate. So then I did my MBA from MICA, where I did an MBA in marketing and communications. So right now I work as a strategy insights analyst in the world's largest media planning company called Group M. So Group M has a lot of agencies in India. One of those agencies is called Wavemaker. So I work in Wavemaker Delhi, but because of the pandemic right now, I have the privilege of working from home. So my interest, I love history. I love, say, existential fiction. I'm a huge film buff because I wanted to be a critic. So if I don't claim to be a film buff, then I'm probably being dishonest to my own self. So I'm a huge film buff, and my love affair with cinema started in 2012 when I could not when I had to face the reality of not being able to make it to IIT, which every engineering aspirant faces some or the other time in their life. My discovery of cinema happened. See, before that, I was this the average Hollywood and Bollywood film viewer, and say watching pirate cinema from pirated DVDs. Or this could land me in jail, but okay, watching cinema from pirated DVDs, going to the theaters, not every Friday, but at least twice a month or once a month, not twice, maybe once a month with mom. Mostly I've watched a lot of movies with my mom during my childhood. And the books also, since this podcast is about books, I will try to segue into books every time. So books also till say 15, till say 15, 16, till say my, until I graduated standard 10th, till then my primary source of books and my primary, I would say, what do you say, my exploratory aspect of books was just limited to what my parents used to give to me or what my parents used to gift to me. And in the sense, the gifting occasions were not, very, I would say, repetitive, or they were not very ubiquitous and widespread. It was actually that, okay, you finished a term in school, you scored great marks. It was more of like a risk reward kind of thing, where I would be doing very well in school, and I would be then given a choice between a lot of movies or a lot of books. So crossword used to be my go-to destination, and that was how I ended up discovering a lot of young fiction during my childhood. So till 10th, I was, you could call me so-called a more or less a mainstream fellow, where I'm watching, say, Hollywood, which is again the studio-driven superhero stuff, or maybe one or two films which were too risky for children, but I ended up watching like V for Vendetta, or maybe the Alien films, or things like that. Still pretty much mainstream science fiction, that kind of stuff. And books also was young fiction and all of that. So the so-called the nirvana or the epiphany that, okay, there is much more to the world of books as well as to the world of cinema came in 2012. When I randomly ended up reading a Nobel Prize winning author's book, which was kept in my dad's closet in the study, and also watching. The name of the book was The Unbearable Lightness of Being. So that was it's by an author called Milan Kundera. He's a Czech author, and essentially he comes from, his context was essentially the advent of communism in the Czech Republic. Okay, that was Czechoslovakia at that time. communism, how people defended communism, and how people brought communism upon themselves, and how the Czech Republic essentially became, say, a satellite country or a pawn of the Soviet Union. But he does not write about politics. He writes about, primarily, he writes about love. He writes about the relationship between two people who feel that when they're in love, they're isolated from the world. So he'll write about a doctor, about a plastic surgeon, and he maybe write about a plastic surgeon who falls in love with a waitress. It's a love story, but essentially an existentialist love story about two people who feel that just because they're in love, that the events that happen around them, these political events, the Russian invasion, intellectuals being shot and killed, a journalist being imprisoned, these events will not affect them because they're in love and they're enough for each other. So this kind of tension between the self and society, the tension between your own self and the person that you've given your half to, that is the person you are in love with. So Milan Kundera as an author explored the ideas of the dynamism between two people when they claim that they're in a relationship. Like what does a relationship comprise of? What does it mean to have trust in a human being? Can human beings essentially be trusted or not? So these kind of questions I was not equipped to even ask, answer, understand, or comprehend when I had first picked up this book. I had read 5 pages of this book and I had kept it down. And I don't know what I can't even understand what this author is writing. This is 2012. I would have been 15, 16 years old. I'm like, boss, ye mere sir ke upar se ja raha hai. I cannot possibly comprehend what is going on. I kept the book down and I went back to young fiction that is essentially the character of Artemis Fowl, who is a criminal mastermind genius. And basically, it's written by an Irish author called Owen Colfer. I'll show you Artemis Fowl. So Disney Disney bought the rights of Artemis Fowl in 2001, but did a very, very shitty job with it, and it just destroyed the character in a very stupid film meant for kids. So Artemis Fowl is essentially a criminal mastermind. He's a child genius who belongs to a crime family in Dublin, Ireland. Okay. And his IQ is considered to be so high, and he's this snotty, smug little young prodigy who is a sociopath who cannot make friends because he's too wise for the world. He's just 13 years old, but he's too wise for the world, and because he's second guesses over everybody. But there is one person who always stands by him, that is his bodyguard called Butler. Okay, and Butler comes from a line of servants who have always served the Fowl family. So the Fowl family is kind of like semi-royalty, kind of Nawab family, and this young prodigy has inherited his father's broken empire. His father has been missing for 3 years. His mother has had a mental breakdown, and she is schizophrenic, and she has post-traumatic stress disorder. So to restore the family name, Artemis Fowl comes of age too early. Comes of age at just 13 rather than say 17 or 18, and literally takes it upon himself to restore the family's honor. And the honor here is the dread that the Fowl family invokes among crime lords and mafias. So
yeah, मेरे को इसको देखे रिची रिच का याद क्यों आ रहा है?
You could call him like an anti-Richie Rich. You could, but an anti-Richie Rich. So essentially, he's craftier, and the writing was, for at least in terms of the writing that was meant for children, this was much more this was darker, subtle, nuanced, and morally ambiguous. So for children, as a child, I always used to look at, even in my own capacity, even as a child, I used to look at stories which never had straightforward plots or endings. I always wanted something which was in some way compelling, but easy enough for me to understand at the age that I was. So, why my love for complex things began? Because when I was in first or second standard, the very first huge book that my parents made me read, it was like an encyclopedia, but a children's encyclopedia called The Big Book of Knowledge. You can see that the cover is frazzled and it's almost broken. This is a 22-year-old book, 1998. My father used to do investment banking, so he used to travel a lot across the world. HSBC, my dad used to work, right? So he used to travel a lot across the world. So he had bought this from London. And the name of the company is Dorling Kindersley. Okay, it's a London publishing company. That company doesn't exist anymore. But I have the book with me. उसके CDs उस समय उसके compact discs आते थे. वो भी my dad had brought. And there used to be things like solar system exploration, dinosaurs exploration. So the Big Book of Knowledge plus the CD of Big Book of Knowledge. So that was like an accompaniment. So the CD was visual help for kids who are very bored of reading or who who don't have the aptitude for reading. But the aptitude for reading developed because of this book. And it's a brilliantly original information book for young readers. Basically, it's information about what is architecture, who went to the moon, things like that. How does different kinds of crustaceans, like what are crabs, what are amphibians, basic things like that. But told in a way in which you're not treating kids as dumb. That was how my I would say perception and my acceptance of some sort of aesthetic actually developed. That if things felt simplistic to me in a story or in a tale, if the characters weren't rich enough, or if the plot didn't have a certain degree of meatiness to it, I felt that it used to insult my intelligence.
Mhm.
So that is how I was always on the verge. I was always in the mode of discovering content that at least used to challenge me in some way or the other. Challenge my perception of the world, challenge my vocabulary, challenge my language, challenge my understanding of how people are. Because as a kid, you are not able to distinguish between the different shades of human nature, right? It's just either somebody's good, somebody's evil, somebody's.
So how old were you when you had discovered this book specifically? You explored
this book, this big second standard, first to second standard, 7-8 years old. माँ बाप ने सिर पे थमा दी थी कि ये देख, ये एनसाइक्लोपीडिया है बच्चों की, ये तुझे पढ़नी है, try to read it. And when they saw that I was able to read it, then they pushed me in that direction. So see, there is one, I just opened a random page and there is a description for kids of the life of the samurai. Okay. So, and then if I turn the page, there is a description for Native Americans. So for a kid who's just 6-7 years old, all of this was so fascinating to me. And I think somehow the roots of my love for history were also there in this book. The question you asked, right, was of that what were your influences and tips for reading. So the most fundamental thing here is that when you're at a very impressionable age, right, of 6, 7, 8 or 9, if you're less than 10 years old, the onus is on your parents to make sure that you are fascinated by worlds that aren't just what you see in front of you. मैं तो उसका श्रेय मैं मेरे parents को दूंगा बोलूँगा.
But like for example, so you are in Maharashtra, you're living in Maharashtra, you are reading about things like Native Americans, samurais and all of that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, चाहो ना चाहो, there's a certain level of exoticism in your perception that exists, right? कि मतलब, what is this exotic world they're talking about? कौन सी दुनिया है? Like journey to the center of the world, or type की मतलब कहाँ की बात हो रही है? And just a second, so like, and when did that transformation come in? कि मतलब नहीं, like there's a certain level of humanism that surrounds them, कि which मतलब एक collective understanding कि नहीं सब एक जैसे ही होते हैं. What my idea, like वो exoticism से more investigative कब हुआ for you? Got my idea.
Okay. Yeah. Oh wow, great question. Yeah. So that would have been much later. Yeah, that would have been 10. That would have been 6 years later, 14, 15. After watching a lot of Nolan films, after finishing Artemis Fowl, after finishing Harry Potter, after watching a lot of more say content. By that time, I started watching Dibakar Banerjee, Oye Lucky Lucky Hoye, Love, Sex or Dhoka. I started watching all of that. So that actually helped me more to understand the universality of people, cultures. In Orbit Mall, Pazara. Orbit Mall was my adda. I have been to Orbit Mall to shop only for books from Crossword. And Crossword was at the ground floor. I have seen the evolution of Crossword from ground floor to first floor to second floor. So and that was what my relationship with Crossword has been. And it was always like, see, I have been pampered and indulged. Okay, I will be very clear about that. That is why maybe I've had so many options and such a life where I could choose what to read, when to read. Because whenever my mom used to take me to Crossword, right, it used to always be Jo Lena Hai. Minimum I used to take 6-7 books. I used to maybe just read 1 or 2 out of them. And iska thoda pad liya. So it was more like being surrounded by books and then reading. Even now, the number of books I own myself, I would have read only 10-15% of all of them. And after the big book, right, my love for history was rooted in this. Amar Chitrakatha's The Historic City of Delhi.
मतलब हिस्ट्री शुरू कहाँ से हो रही है? From the Mughal
732 AD, अनंगपाल तोमर, लालकोट, even before पृथ्वीराज चौहान. अब मेरे को हिस्ट्री का दिल्ली का हिस्ट्री मेरे को पूरा chronologically रखता है. Because this was again given to me in Jaipur in 2000, because my summer vacations were in Jaipur, right? See, I'm telling you, as Jomadari says in the namesake, my reading habits, my passions have been a series of accidents. because I was exposed to certain books, certain themes, genres, certain styles of writing in my childhood, and they have greatly shaped my sensibilities. So that is what Oscar Wilde also says, right? That when you are reading, if you can't help but you are reading something, then then you will be proud of the human being you become when you cannot help it. कि मतलब जब तुम अगर तुम्हें जो दिया जा रहा है पढ़ने को और तुम हेल्प नहीं सकते, तुम्हें पढ़ना पड़ रहा है, वो पढ़ के अगर तुम जो भी पढ़ रहे हो, तुम खुद के you'll be proud of yourself only when you read when you can't help it, so that you become the human being you want to, even when you can't help it.
So, like, tell me one thing. Like, coming back to the part of you, that nirvana or that renaissance of yours that you had in 2012, something that you were exposed to a newer world. So, the book you read with the Czech Republic story around that love story about with that political context and about or background. So, when did you go back to that book again?
Yeah, of course, I went back to that book 7 years later, 2019. And I read the whole book at Mica, and I thought it was calling to me. I'm like, no, I have to go back to what started my.
But वो 5 पेज में इतना दे दिया तुम्हें?
नहीं, उसने नहीं दिया ना. वो तो किताब मैंने तभी रख दी थी. मेरे को सिनेमा ने वो टाइम पे अवेकनिंग दिया था. किताबों में तो वो टाइम पे मेरा टेस्ट तभी भी थी आर्टेमिस फॉल, हैरी पॉटर, डैन ब्राउन, क्योंकि डा विंची कोड का बहुत नाम हुआ था और मैंने फिल्म देखी थी मेरे मॉम डैड के साथ, और फिल्म के बाद में किताब पढ़ी थी मैंने. बिफोर वेंडेटा भी मैंने फिल्म देखी थी, फिल्म के बाद मैंने Alan Moore की graphic novel पढ़ी थी. So essentially it was a mixed bag where my past 2 books always were a segue from cinema. Cinema was the first medium I was always exposed to every time, and then I used to segue to books. But this Unbearable Letters of Being was something that my father used to adore and love. And that is why I was like, okay, dad किस तरह बात कर रहे हैं, मैं जरा पढ़ के देखता हूँ. But 2012 में मुझे समझ नहीं आई थी. I was not equipped, not mature enough to understand what was being spoken about in that book. So I did not pay much attention to it. The same thing happened with me with Pyasa. I used to hate the book just because one of my relatives hated. Relatives loved the film, so I hated the film because I hated my relative. Okay, but later I rediscovered that film, and then again my world changed because what. So with books also that has happened. So the film The Dark Knight, I knew I watched something different and I was shaken. And that day I went home and I discovered Artemis Fowl. 2008. This was July 2008 when Dark Knight released. I discovered Artemis Fowl. I read the graphic novel first, and I was in love with the characters, the writing. Because it wasn't your usual happy-go-lucky, yippee ki ये young fiction की सब अच्छे हैं, कोई छोटा सा conflict है जो एकदम superficial है, और बस उसमें से निकल गए तो बस हो गया गुडी वर्ल्ड की गुडी वर्ल्ड रहेगी. This was about a boy whose mother is insane. Of course, I was drawn to it. And you can imagine my state of mind. I watched The Dark Knight. I watched Heath Ledger on screen playing the Joker. In the evening, again, I'm craving for more quote-unquote dark. Dark is a very superficial word to use, but I'm using it just for reference.
Colloquial इसलिए.
Yeah. Slang. You can euphemism.
Okay.
I wanted more dark stuff. So Artemis Fowl was just something I'd randomly bought by instinct at Crossword maybe 2-3 weeks ago. Because मैं पीछे में पढ़ता था. I used to literally do this. I used to go, my mom used to say, क्या जो लेना ले. I used to go to Young Fiction, pick up random books, read the synopsis, the plot, maybe. And that time there were no smartphone, no Wikipedia. So I was at the mercy of what was written behind the book to try and discover whether I should buy the book or not. And I'm not saying every time my decisions were right, because I've been shouted at upon also. I've been reprimanded also. यार कितना किताब खरीदते तूने 6,000 का बिल किया है क्रॉसवर्ड में, उसमें से तो कितने पड़ेगा. But I still used to keep on buying, and now I buy only the books I read. So that is why that at least that budget is now within a certain rationale.
So firstly, tell me what are current reads? What are you reading currently?
Yeah, so currently I am reading Jhumpa Lahiri. I have rediscovered her because of you. So I read Unaccustomed Earths. I had read The Lowland. I had not watched The Namesake. The Namesake I watched after Irfan died. Okay. I had read Unaccustomed Earths and The Lowland, that too because somebody I liked in school had recommended her to me.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm not even joking. And I knew of Jhumpa Lahiri because my mother had once said, "Hey, this is a good writer. She's won the Pulitzer Prize. Check her out." So you can see that my parents they are not overtly or actively dictating my taste, but they have been those silent sentinels who
just
always
nudged
me into that direction. Hey, check her out if you want to, if you find the time. So, but and Harry Potter, my mother brought for me Philosopher's Stone, and I did not read Harry Potter until I was 14, 15 years old. 2 महीने में मेरा बोर्ड्स था, हैरी पॉटर की फाइनल फिल्म आने वाली है, यार अभी तो पढ़ना ही पड़ेगा. तो मैंने बैठ के 2 दिन, एक हफ्ते में मैंने सारी किताबें खत्म कर दी थी. मेरे 2 महीने बाद बोर्ड्स था.
So currently you are reading Jhumpa Lahiri वापस से पढ़ रहे हो.
I'm reading Jhumpa Lahiri again. I'm reading Interpreter of Maladies, and I'm also reading. So there is a book on Ghalib. Okay, by so there is this great Islamic scholar called Shamsur Rahman Farooqi. Okay, he's written a book called In the Shadow of the Sword. So he writes about Islam in India. He writes about Islamic political thought in India and how it has evolved post 1947. What factors it is contingent upon and what it takes from pre 1947 history. And he's one of the foremost forwards and the ultimate word on Islamic thought in India. Islamic thought in the abstract. Okay, like how would an Indian Muslim think? That is, if you want the answer, Shamsur Rahman Farooqi is the guy you would. So his daughter has written a book on Ghalib. She teaches in, I think, New Jersey, in a university in New Jersey. So she has written a book on Ghalib, a critical biography of Ghalib. Yeah, it's called Ghalib, A Wilderness at My Doorstep. And why after history, after Amar Chitra Katha, that's the next thing I read was Navneet's Akbar Birbal. The very next thing I read was Akbar Birbal. So again, my fascination with Akbar and the Mughals. So this was when I was 8 years old, 7 years old. Then there was stories of Shiva. That is why again my fascination with Shiva's iconography and Shiva's mythology and Shiva as a character. Because Shiva is one of my. I am not a religious person. You can call me a spiritualist maybe. Advaita Vedantist, half Advaita Vedantist, half spiritualist, half Gandhian, whatever. But Shiva is. I have a soft corner for Shiva's allegories and Shiva's myths and Shiva's Puranas basically. There was a bit of Batman, not Spider-Man, just more of Batman. Tinkle Comics, along with Tinkle Comics, Shikari Shambhu and Supandi and all those people. This was third standard, fourth standard. Along with them, there was the Phantom. So again, my love for ghosts, for the macabre, for mysteries, all of that, for places that are eerie, haunted, for stories that have no plausible explanation. All of that stems from the fact that I was exposed to Phantom. And the first book I bought in 2005, okay, from Crossword, was a book called Skullduggery Pleasant. It is essentially about a sorcerer who can conjure magic from with a flick of his wrists, with a snap of his fingers, who's a walking skeleton. Basically Ghost Rider, but not Ghost Rider. Uske baad se then I started with Tintin. Tintin was 6th standard, 7th standard.
Ah, lovely.
I have each and every book of Tintin in the house. This was possible again because I had indulging parents. कि नहीं तू कुछ पढ़ रहा है, if you oh man, oh wow.
I've been trying to recollect because मतलब क्या हुआ था कि मैंने सारी स्कूल में पढ़ी है, like you know that Steven Spielberg की जो मूवी आई थी ना, that was when my fascination for Tintin started, ठीक है, for me personally. And स्कूल में ऐसा Tintin wave आया, मतलब Tintin and Asterix जैसे को क्या होता है कि Tintin की भी limited books है लाइब्रेरी में, तो people used to go for Asterix अगर वो नहीं है तो ऐसा wave आया, like anytime you go, it's impossible to find the book. I have read all the books. I think YouTube पे सीरीज भी है पूरा, like वो animated पूरा 40 मिनट का. Yeah, it's wonderful. I absolutely love it. So I've been trying to recollect it, like get a collection of all the books for myself now. And if I've decided कि हर महीना जो भी छोटा मोटा कमाता हूँ abstract से या फिर जो छोटा मोटा pocket money होती है, so from that so it's around 500 एक book, ठीक है. So I order one book per month. I'm being ordered this ताकि एक कलेक्शन हो जाए मेरे पास by the end of the year. I think ज़्यादा books तो टाइम लग जाएगा, but like still one book per month I'll get it. And I mean, you know, honestly, like let's talk about Tintin. चलो उस पे थोड़ा और delve करते हैं. मैं अपना point बाद में I'll give my point and you then give me a point on that because but Tintin has been a very very important because for person like me जिसका I think घर से उतना influence शायद नहीं है in terms of reading. तो for me to develop a habit खुद से self induced type का एक habit develop करना, Tintin was a big factor in that, ठीक है. So when I was reading this Black Island वाली जो book है again, so what I realized was how मतलब कितनी simplistic चीजें कि morals and justice and all of that has been talked about, what is right and what is wrong.
But it doesn't shout in your face.
Not at all. First thing that is there, and secondly, sometimes we forget that he's not just an adventurer, he's a journalist. And in today's political context, कि मतलब a person goes to so मतलब इतने leaps and bounds, इतना ज़्यादा आगे जाता है just to get the मतलब just to provide people justice, the job that is maybe of the justice system or maybe of the police or someone,
and to capture the truth of what happened.
and मैं आज के जमाने में पढ़ रहा था and I was reading it simultaneously. I was like obviously हम रोज न्यूज पढ़ते हैं, right? So like दोनों पैरेलल चल रहा है, ठीक है? I'm like this is the benchmark and just try to get halfway, आधे पर ही उसके पहुंच जाओ, then I'll be like, you know what, you are close to Tintin. Like मेरा benchmark is not an actual journalist out there. मतलब maybe let's say Gabriel Garcia Marquez is a benchmark कुछ लेवल पे, but उसके अलावा there's Tintin. like कि मतलब यहाँ तक तुम पहुंच सको, that should be your aim in your life as a journalist.
Oh man, no, and the way Captain Haddock was shown as an alcoholic, I mean, it's meant for children, but like her gaze actually kind of glorifying alcohol. So, and it's so much fun, and the characters are so eccentric, Thompson, and Snowy had a voice of his own, which only Snowy could hear.
So what influence has Tintin or other comics like these have had on you, generally?
So, I mean, my sense of adventure is, I don't know, you know what, actually, it's been my understanding of aesthetics, the way a story is told, the way a story is populated by people, and the way a world is slowly is unraveled, you know, around these people. The sense of that kind of aesthetics of how you capture a particular person in a particular place, in a particular time, that sense of how stories are the glue that binds different episodes and different vignettes and portraits together. Na? Tintin actually helped create that in my mind. Tintin and even the Phantom helped me kind of understand, number one, that sometimes while fighting crime, the boundaries between good and evil are blurred. Maybe I would not have been able to articulate it the way I am right now, but at an emotional level, I understood that ठीक है, जब तुम बुराई से लड़ते हो तो कभी-कभी तुम भी उन्हीं की तरह बन सकते हो. That there is a possibility, if not a surety, of foregoing your morals in the quest of ultimate justice. So that sense of moral, again, I'm coming back to the same theme of ambiguity. And by 2008 or 9, I don't have a book, unfortunately, but I used to read a lot of Goosebumps also. Again, my love for horror. Goosebumps. And so that time Ruskin Bond I discovered because I had a poem of Ruskin Bond and I had 2 short stories of Ruskin Bond in school. That is The Tiger in the Tunnel, where there's this young kid, this forest guard, basically a khalasi worker, who is working in a tunnel which is right in the middle of a forest, okay? And then he's basically the signal man taking a lantern to the tunnel, and he turns on the lantern to say that the road is clear, that the railway track is clear and the plane can pass. So every night he's doing this, but suddenly one night he does not return back to the hut where his son is waiting for him because a leopard mauls him to death. So the son goes, he actually takes his father's axe, kills the leopard and takes his father's spot. And he comes of age. So this kind of story had enthralled me. And that is how I discovered, and as Mom Ruskin Bond said, okay, let's go to Crossword, let's buy all the Ruskin Bond books you can find. So I went to a town called Dehra. I bought Ruskin Bond Strangers in the Night. Again, Ruskin Bond has been very, very instrumental in deciding, in determining my sense of aesthetics of a horror tale. It has to be subtle. The characters have to be human. You don't need jump scares. It has to be psychological. It has to grow on you. All of these principles came from my reading of Ruskin Bond in 2008.
So, talking about firstly your reading habits, okay. Generally, like for example, what I do, let's say if I'm reading like a non-fiction, a political, let's say currently I'm reading Bhagat Singh, ठीक है? Bhagat Singh के मैं चीजें पढ़ रहा हूँ. So my understanding of reading something like that is कि example उसने एक बहुत बढ़िया पैराग्राफ लिखा, ठीक है, किसी चीज के बारे में, why am I atheist में, why am I an atheist के में उसने लिखा है पैराग्राफ रिगार्डिंग क्यों बिलीफ सही नहीं है या फिर like क्यों बिलीफ इज जस्ट क्या बोलते हैं लिमिटेशन ऑफ अ ह्यूमन और समथिंग, ऐसे कुछ लिखा उसने. तो मैं इसको पेंसिल से मार्क कर दूंगा पूरे पैराग्राफ को. देन आफ्टर अ फ्यू डेज आई विल रीड इट अगेन. उसमें से जो मेन 1-2 लाइन थी उसको मैं हाईलाइट कर दूंगा विद अ हाईलाइटर. तो मेरे लेवल्स ऑफ मार्किंग एंड ट्राइंग टू रिमेंबर दीज थिंग्स ताकि मुझे एक्चुअली इम्प्रिंट करे मेरे दिमाग में आर twofold, threefold, and they are a process for me. They are a progressive way में होता है. Do you like to mark things while you're reading, or is it for you? Is it like कि मतलब it one time read में वापस उठाने नहीं वाला हूँ इस चीज को?
Yeah, mostly I will confess that it is like that. I have never, I'll tell you, in my 25 years of my existence, I would have never ever underlined a single sentence in a book ever. So it's not, and it's not that I will not think about it, or I will not I will disregard it completely, or I will be nonchalant about it in a way that even if I don't understand, I'm fine. So more or less, I haven't ever had, see, the urge to fixate on a particular line. I understand that you want to get to the depth of it and you want to uncover any more abstrusive or any more substance that you feel is lost to you. So you want to keep digging and find out what more can you get out of it.
Mm.
I understand that is great actually. I look up to you in this regard that you're actually doing this. For me, reading is not a goal-based process where I have to complete certain things by a certain age. It has been a very lovely, I would say, fulfilling and enriching journey for me. And I have never thought of reading as a goal. Oh my God, I have to finish this. Yeah, once or twice it has been a goal in terms of Harry Potter, that I have to finish all the books because I have to watch the final film, otherwise I won't understand. And who will explain it to my father? Because I will watch the film with my parents. And my father will be like, ye kaun hai, wo kaun hai, ye kaise hai, so I have to explain it. So that was actually the motivation to read and the impulse to read.
So,
But what I do is, when I'm reading, I'll go to Wikipedia maybe to search for something which I find. Or maybe if there is some historical or some particular cultural thing being spoken about, I will Google it. So for example, in the namesake, there are a lot of 70s and 80s cultural objects which Jompa talks about. If I don't know something, while I'm reading, I will Google it. Rather than underlining, I'll Google something. And when move on, then I'll never come back because then I condemn it to memory and it's there. In 2014 or 15, I got more, I started understanding the difference between left and right, between what liberalism was and maybe what a more totalitarian regime was. Maybe after the first time somebody's got elected somewhere, I realized how things were happening. So that time I actually started reading books of fearless journalism, where fearless journalists are actually gone and uncovered something. So those kind of truths, journalistic truths, I was more fascinated suddenly. So wo phase tha mera ek, where I used to read books like the Hashimpura massacre. So this was 2014, 15, 16. So in 1987, what had happened was that after the 1987, what had happened after riots from Meerut, there was जैसे अभी CRPF है ना, CRPF है, CISF है, तो उस समय PAC था, Provincial Armed Constabulary. They were basically paramilitary police called whenever there was an emergency, there were riots, or maybe any national any security related issue which the state police is not equipped to handle. So after the Meerut riots, in a town 40 kilometers away from Meerut called Hashimpura, what happened was that the two units of the PAC under a major general, I think Agastya or Avasthi or somebody like that, and the Agnihotri. Of course, it has to be a major Agnihotri. Under a major Agnihotri, two companies just rounded up a random group of Muslims, old, young, middle-aged, anybody, just 40, 45 people, anybody they could find, just random people from a basti, loaded them into the PSC, the huge police van, took them 20 kilometers away near Nala, massacred them at point blank range. 42 Muslims died who were innocent people just living their daily lives, caught by a police unit and just killed because of communal tension. No reason at all. So those people got convicted in 2020 finally by the Allahabad High Court. Finally, those people got convicted. So those half of the people who were killed, who were wearing police uniform and who had killed those innocent people, half of them have passed away, and those remaining ones have now finally been brought to justice. So the man who's written this book about the massacre and what actually happened, his name is Vibhuti Narayan Rai, and he was the DA, the district superintendent. He was a DS. And so I was like, oh my God. And essentially the guy, the major Agnihotri, who had taken his two companies under him and ordered them to kill 40 Muslims, he had lost his nephew, who was part of the RSS in the Meerut riots. So as revenge, he had just rounded up 40 Muslims and killed them out of rage. And then there's another book called Gujarat Files by Rana Ayub. That also I read, and I was reading all of these books to kind of understand what true journalism is. I've read Barkhadat's book during that time. This was 14 to 16. My initial years in engineering when I was still trying to figure out my political leanings. So I've read these kind of stories which have been buried under the ages of history, which actually talk about how ugly this country can at times become.
But also tell me about all other autobiographies or books like these that have helped you get your political leanings के बारे में ज़्यादा aware.
It's Hashimpura, it's Gujarat Files, it is Riot by Shashi Tharoor.
Love that. यहीं पढ़ी है.
Yeah. And I've read a lot of R.K. Lakshman, the common man, these cartoons essentially, which were political in nature, which used to again parody almost everything that was going. So actually, R.K. Lakshman's cartoons, his entire set of cartoons, which have been published in separate books, they were a window into post-independent India's history for me, because I was born in 1995. I don't know what happened before I was born in this country. So R.K. Lakshman's caricatures and his cartoons, which had appeared in Times of India issues every day, those were actually a window into. And I used to then read those cartoons. I never got the context. I used to go and ask my mom, यार मम्मी बताओ ये आर के लक्ष्मण यहाँ पे किसके लिए बात कर रहे हैं. मम्मी उसने अच्छा ये न्यूज, अच्छा ये मंडल कमीशन, अच्छा इंदिरा गांधी का ये, अच्छा इमरजेंसी, अच्छा. So my foray into political ideology was actually through the works of a cartoonist.
So I mean, obviously, I'm pretty sure you were grateful about the fact that initial parental influence काफी रहा था in terms of bringing up into literature enthusiast, books enthusiast, as a sense में making you question things. But for someone who जिसको ये इसके लिए जर्नी बहुत सेल्फ इंड्यूस रही है, और लेट्स से फॉर समवन जो अभी रीडिंग हैबिट शुरू करना चाहता है, और लाइक जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल एब्स्ट्रैक्ट में भी काफी लोग आते हैं जो लोग कभी इन्हें बुक पढ़ी नहीं, या फिर बहुत टाइम बाद पढ़ रहे हैं, फिर जो लोग बोलते हैं कि बुक्स पढ़ी जाती नहीं हमसे, लेकिन फिर हमसे बैठा जाता नहीं 2 मिनट से ज्यादा बुक को लेके या समथिंग लाइक दैट. What tips will you have for them? Firstly, in terms of recommendations, and secondly, in terms of कि आप कैसे उस बुक को पढ़नी चाहिए. Like, what will be your कैसे इनको जर्नी करनी चाहिए अपनी getting into?
They should honestly, you know what? They should start with R.K. Lakshman and Amar Chitra Katha. That is the only way they will understand the value of storytelling. Because you know what? I'll tell you what happens. That the underlying psychology behind the fact that reading something feels tortuous is because the only reference point for them is a school book. Okay. Apart from anything else in the world. For me, the school books were always something I just had to do because I knew there was a world waiting for me in crossword, which was 15 minutes away. For a lot of people, this has not been the case, and I have been highly privileged, and I know that. So, for those people who have not been privy to this kind of privilege, what they can do is they can actually, a lot of Amar Chitra Katha is still online. It is there now. They put it up. And they can actually get Amar Chitra Katha and read a lot of Indian history first through Amar Chitra Katha. To first learn about that country in terms of images and small letters. And they still feel they're reading comic books. Because comic books were created for people who were averse to reading long fiction and who wanted more pulpy, more racy fare with a little bit more imagination, a little bit more flights of fancy. So then character, and they were already people wanted post-war heroes to look up to. So Superman, Batman, all these people were created. Okay, all these characters were created. So these people need those kind of entry points into reading. And for those people, and first of all, they have to be, I'll tell you what, there is an educationist called Paulo Freire, okay? He wrote an amazing book called The Pedagogy of Operation. What that says, it talks about the way of teaching. And that is the first thing I was taught at Micah also, Pedagogy of Operation. कि क्या होता है ना, स्कूल में द इंस्ट्रक्टर इज ऑलवेज एट अ हायर पेडिस्टल कि नहीं, मैं जो बोल रहा हूँ वो सही है, मैं जो पढ़ा रहा हूँ दिस इज द ओनली वे. रट्टा मारना है, ये सम तो रट्टा मारना है, एग्जाम में यही आता है तो मैं तुम्हें यही पढ़ाऊंगा, मैं तुम्हें इसके बाहर का नहीं पढ़ाऊंगा. एंड यू हैव टू unquestioningly you have to gaze at your teacher as if they are the be all and end of all the knowledge that you will always be capable of imbibing and of understanding. वो केस नहीं है ना. So this mode of education, Paulo Freire says, is wrong. And that leads to a lot of problems. One of those problems is the underappreciation and the indifference to art. When I was first exposed to my very first proper book, it was this. So during that time, my fear of huge books automatically vanished. Because this was it, and I had never looked upon it as a task. My parents never said, "Beta, इसको एक हफ्ते में खत्म करना है, अगले हफ्ते इस पे एग्जाम होगी." नहीं था वो. मैंने ये 2 साल में बैठ के किताब पढ़ी होगी. It was just there कि जब भी तुम्हें चाहिए, whenever you are curious about the world, a book will be there to answer your questions. It is a friend. It is not a task that you have to complete. Reading is a privilege. It is not a task or a compulsion. ये नहीं समझ में आता लोगों को. और ये समझाने के लिए I would say read something funny first.
Or any other tips? Any other tips for newbies?
Start reading Ruskin Bond. Ruskin Bond is the best antidote to the fear of reading. Extremely simple, talking about beautiful things. Who doesn't like the Himalayas, man? Who doesn't like the hills? The hills can be a starting point for everybody. And people should read Ruskin Bond's ghost stories, I would say, first, because ghost stories capture the imagination of even the most Philistine of people.
And again, like, how about preparing a schedule? Should they?
Not at all. Never prepare a schedule. Never. Take 1 year to read Ruskin Bond. I don't care. But read.
That makes sense.
And to these people, they never have to be taunted or even see again pedagogy of oppression. They don't have to feel that they are being oppressed by your demands of asking them to read. You have to discover the joy of reading with them. So maybe they can start with Alan Moore's V for Vendetta also, because V for Vendetta is a great story with powerful themes of rebellion, of fascism gone berserk, of vigilantism being almost equated with terrorism. And we shouldn't even expect from those people that they will reflect upon these kind of themes. It's fine if they don't. It's fine if somebody calls. It's fine if somebody in the end says, no, nahi jama.
You know, interesting thing I generally notice when my friends also constantly ask me about reading shuru karna hai, padhna shuru karna hai. So for them, and I think it was for me also earlier, was the fact that एक रीडिंग हैबिट, कोट एंड कोट रीडिंग हैबिट होनी चाहिए. क्या पढ़ रहे हो फर्क नहीं पड़ता, क्यों पढ़ रहे हो फर्क नहीं पड़ता. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, लाइक मोस्ट ऑफ द पीपल आई नो अराउंड मी, their self-induced reading habit develops or starts through self-help books. ठीक है, through Robin Sharma or let's say, I don't know, for some people it's also been Chetan Bhagat for that matter. काफी लोग के लिए it's about developing a reading habit more than trying to explore new avenues of reading and new worlds. तो मेरे लिए एक लिमिटेशन मुझे लोगों को टिप्स देने में आ जाती है.
Again, this developing a reading habit, I wouldn't say is again the right approach, because the thing is that it is again you are allocating a task upon yourself that I have to develop a reading habit. It again feels like an encumbrance.
तो ऐसा सबके लिए नहीं हो सकता. लाइक कांट वी गिव टिप्स टू पीपल कि तुम लोग शुरू करो, सेल्फ हेल्प से शुरू करो, एटलीस्ट बस रीडिंग शुरू कम से कम हो तुम्हारा.
No, self help defeats the purpose. Why should somebody who cannot approach, does not have a natural inclination to read something, why should they be asked to read a book which claims that it knows better?
Like, tell me one thing, what's been the proportion for you in terms of fiction and non-fiction? Like, how would you demarcate the proportion?
So these days, so I will tell you, it started with 90% fiction, 95% fiction, 5% non-fiction. Then 2014, 15, 16, it was mostly non-fiction. And reading Shashi Tharoor, reading Hashim Pura, reading Gujarat Files, reading mostly books by journalists on the state of India. And then again it came back to history, where I discovered William Dalrymple. And kind of it was like a refrain back to one of the very first books that I've read in childhood. That is Amar Chitrakata's History of Delhi and City of Jinns. That is Delhi. So this is again a very puerile, a superficial. But for a child, this is great. This is more than sufficient for a child. But as an adult, maybe you would find some things historically inaccurate or lacking. And naturally, I did not even remember that this book existed. When I was rummaging through my cupboard, Nasankar, for this podcast, I was surprised to see that this was still there. I was like, oh my God, that's why I love history so much. I rediscovered again why I like the things I like now, because of how I was shaped. And City of Jinns is one book I think every Indian should read. Every Indian who can have access to this book should read this book. Because it speaks about a city, not just a historical account, but a lived account of a city that has almost looked at confronted time in its, and looked at time in the eye and withstood I mean, I don't know, countless invasions and still somehow teetering and tottering and still alive.
What are the other
That
books
is-
I should read if I have to know more about Delhi and history of India?
Yeah, City of Jinns. Then Romila Thapar Somnatha was again something I gravitated towards after City of Jinns, because I heard Dalrymple talk about Romila Thapar. So from authors to authors, then you segue, because you read one author and then my method became this of discovering books. That once, this is from 2014-15 onwards, that when when I started reading a lot of reviews of everything, because I wanted to be a critic, right? And my decision about criticism had not stemmed in yet. So I was still like, oh my god, reviews, oh my god, criticism of books, criticism of poems, criticism of cinema, criticism of food, everything. So then I read some interview where Dalrymple was talking about Romila Thapar and her work in Indian history. So Thapar wrote about Somnath and the invasion of Mahmud of Ghazni, and about how 50,000, always this figure of 50,000 Hindus being killed in every invasion. Romila Thapar actually tried to answer that question as to what is the actual history of the Somnath temple, and was the deity actually destroyed, what happened. So and that is why it's called Somnath, the many voices of history, because every 100 years the story changes. So that is how history became fascinating to me, that discovering more about the past helped me answer where I have come from and how the culture I have been born and brought up in, how it has been shaped. Romila Thapar on ancient India, Romila Thapar's book on nationalism, Somnath, then it's early India, not ancient India, it is early India. Then William Dalrymple's The Last Mughal, everything by Dalrymple, except the one he's written on Xanadu, the one he's written on the Byzantine Empire, except that, everything by Dalrymple. Everything Dalrymple is written in India. Okay, you read White Mughals essentially. Brilliant book. And so interesting,
But ek baat bata,
yeah.
Like, so I got this from an uncle of mine, gift mila meko. So, but if I have to dive into William Dalrymple, so should I start with this or Last Mughals or something like that?
Start with City of Jinns. It's like, again, the way it's written, the book is like Ganesha is writing the Mahabharata, listening from Ved Vyasa, tu bol mein likhta hai.
Oh wow.
Aisa. Called Manuk S. Pillai also. He also writes beautifully.
Yeah.
He's written about the Deccan, that is rebel sultans. And also there is this great historian called R.C. Majumdar. Okay, he was one of the foremost historians of India. So he's also written great books on history you can read. And after that, then, because my love for cinema also made me then read a lot of books on cinema, like books on directors. And my obsession with Guru Dutt made me buy every book that is ever written on Guru Dutt. This was 2016 and onwards. So there is a book called Guru Dutt, A Tragedy in Three Acts by Arun Kokkar. Arun Kokkar is one of the foremost film critics who people don't know about. He's a National Award winner. And he writes about... So this book on Guru Dutt is the winner of the National Award for Best Book on Cinema.
Oh wow.
Okay. So it's called Guru Dutt, A Tragedy in Three Acts. So he writes about the metaphors in his films, about type, about archetype, about how different visual and oral devices in Guru Dutt's films talk about how Guru Dutt grew up and what kind of cinema he watched. So essentially a dissection and a deconstruction of Guru Dutt's film aesthetic. And there is another person called N.K. Raghavendran. He writes about the top 100 films of India, which you have to watch. So it's a book, and like he's written 3-4 paragraphs on every film, and why he feels that this film is an important film that needs to be, and it has all kinds of movies. It has like a film from 1930 called Tukaram, Sant Tukaram, and it also has DDLZ. It has everything. Other books on cinema is so there is this woman called Nasreen Munni Kabir. Okay, so that woman is essentially also like a Guru Dutt, and she's a great film historian. So she's written a lot on a lot of film personalities, and you should read her books on Hindi cinema. Then there is a book of Satyajit Ray called Deep Focus, Reflection of Cinema. Essentially, Satyajit Ray talking about cinema, his views on cinema. So there is a great Russian film director called Andrei Tarkovsky. Okay,
Yeah.
he passed away because he shot in a place that had nuclear radiation. और रेडिएशन उसको लग गया, उसको कैंसर से मर गया. So there he writes, he feels that cinema is nothing but So basically, you know how a sculptor works, right? A sculptor takes raw stone and he chisels a figure out of it. So sculptor, when sculpts, he creates something out of a stone, and it takes some time to make that, right? So Andrei Tarkovsky says that cinema is nothing but sculpting in time. So a filmmaker is nothing but an author who writes in space and time. So the manipulation of space, time, and perception is cinema. So he essentially writes about his views on his own films, on how he feels cinema has evolved, and how cinema should be viewed and analyzed and experienced. So Sculpting in Time is also an amazing book for anybody who wants to learn more about movies. There is a book called Film, A Critical Introduction. That is a rookie level, beginner stuff, extremely beginner stuff. And to learn best of cinema is Roger Ebert. You read his reviews. You just, that is like, you begin
I've started to do that. मैं हर movie के लिए करता हूँ वो.
First you watch it. You don't think about anything. You watch it. You keep your thoughts to yourself. Then you read the review. And then you debate with the review. That's what you do.
Other guilty pleasures?
Yeah, Artemis Fowl is a guilty pleasure. Artemis Fowl isn't exactly great literature.
Abhi.
No, right now not really. I've read Jason Bourne. I've read some Jason Bourne books. Then I've read there was this author called Vince Flynn. He died of cancer, and he had created this CIA agent called Mitch Rapp. So I've read a lot of those intriguing small novels. They were all racy thrillers, pulpy racy thrillers. Then I discovered in cinema. I discovered then The Shining by Stanley Kubrick. So I delved into Stephen King's The Shining and some of Stephen King's books. So I read again horror because I was always attracted to horror because of Ruskin Bond, because of Goosebumps.
So इसी बात पे आता है ना. चलो, the next question I remember I had asked you कि हम इस बारे में बात करेंगे. Was regarding what is your opinion on book to film adaptations generally? Like, how do you see them?
Yeah, so book to film adaptations are more or less it is always about external constraints which you cannot fight. A director cannot fight external constraints. A studio cannot fight external constraints. If an author has in legal contractual terms written that if you're adapting my book, you don't change a thing. If it's written that, then you can't change a thing. Okay. And no matter what your sensibilities are, you cannot change anything. Then it is a contractual problem. It is not the problem of the artist. Okay. But if we assume for a moment that all those binding clauses aren't there and all those compulsions aren't governing the adaptation, then I would say that it is more important to capture the essence of a book rather than the plot verbatim. If you feel that a certain character has to be depicted less, needs lesser screen time, and some other character has to be maybe incorporated in a better way or given more limelight, so to say, or given more, I would say, narrative heft, go for it, man. You're making a film. It just happens to be based on a book.
So, in order to wrap up the conversation, I would like you to give in some last minute recommendations or like last minute tips or things you personally focus on while reading books. What is your understanding today? आज आप अगर book पढ़ रहे हो, what's your perception of reading currently?
It's about how evocative the text is and what is brimming under the surface of what's written. See, because my sensibilities right now, I am not blowing my own trumpet, but my sensibilities right now have become too refined because of the kind of movies I've been watching. And the kind of content I watch right now has become even more arcane and even more even rare, so to say. So that kind of sensibility is now also leaching into books actually.
Any other
recommendations?
Last minute जो हम cover नहीं कर पाए अभी तक.
Recommendations. Read. So if you think Anton Chekhov was one of the greatest story writers in Russian literature, one of the greatest contemporary short story writers, who is also a Nobel Prize winning author. She is a Canadian author called Alice Munro, winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature 2013. Okay. You should read, and she only writes short stories, 7 pages, 8 pages, that's it. Oh yeah, of course. And another book you should really read, Indian author again. It is called Narcopolis, written by a man called Jeet Thayil. And the story of Jeet Thayil is so fascinating. He lost 25 years of his life to opium. साउथ बॉम्बे में कालबा देवी में वो सब पुराने घर देखे ना तुमने चाल, तो 1980s तक वो चॉल्स में ना ओपियम डेंस होते थे. हाफिम वो कटोरे में पाइप लेके लोग हाफिम दिन रात फूकते थे और खुद को हाफिम में खुद की जिंदगी गवा देते थे. तो ये जो ऑथर है ना जीत थईल, he spent a major part of his life in those opium dens, looking at the kind of people who come there, from pimps to eunuchs to like politician के बिगड़े बच्चे to beggars to small time traders to I mean all sorts of characters that populate the everyday landscape of 70s Bombay. This author Jeet Thayil this was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize in 2012. Jeet Thayil has literally reinvented the fiction novel form. You know how he's written it? He writes from the perspective of the man who's high as fuck, and you will never know when the narrative shifts from him to the opium pipe and how the opium pipe is perceiving the world, and how it's like if I smoke a joint, then what if I'm so high that I feel that the joint has started speaking, and the joint is my alter ego, and the joint has its own way of narrating its musings about the world. And after a point, I don't know who is talking. Is the joint talking? Am I talking? Is the room speaking? Is the bed I sit on, is the cushion speaking, which is soiled with the body fluids of so many people who might have made love on it? I mean, that kind of greasy, underground, dingy atmosphere. And this man has literally written vignettes about 70s Bombay in this book. So he's written a lot of other books also called The Book of Chocolate Saints. It's about Portuguese painters from Goa. Notes from the Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is one of the covers I like. So essentially, it's about Dostoevsky when he was in prison in a Siberian gulag. He was literally in a labor camp, and there he's thought about that life is worthless, and human beings essentially keep on inflicting the same kind of tortures upon them centuries after centuries. So it's basically in nihilist and full of a lot of self-loathing, but it is compulsory reading for, again, serious readers. It starts with this line: I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. An unattractive man. I think that my liver hurts. But actually, I don't know a damn thing about my illness. I am not even sure what it is that hurts. Then Gabriel Garcia Marquez का ये किताब भी है, Memories of My Melancholy Horse. Basically, he's a 90-year-old man who wants to have sex with a 14-year-old girl, and he calls up his girl supplier, who's the madam of a whorehouse. He calls her up and he asks her to give him the girl because his 90th birthday is coming up or something. So they have a philosophical dialogue of, essentially, it's just a philosophical device to explore sex and sexuality.
So Pranav, just to wrap it up, anything else you want to tell about someone who wants to read, any motivation or something about the abstract room, why someone should join the abstract room maybe?
Oh my god, the abstract room has literally just the fact that it has given me so many friends is just happenstance. Actually, it has made me strive to articulate myself in ways that I had never known before, and the abstract room has helped me rediscover my passions in a way. And even if I would claim that I'm an avid reader, I had never properly read Manto before. I'd never read Chekhov properly before. So, I mean, even if everybody in the abstract room has different degrees of sensibilities, I would still say that Sankalp is doing a great job by trying to bring everybody on a common platform where they can have a dialogue over a piece of content that they experience together. So that shared sense of a communal experience that is there, that is priceless and that is irreplaceable more than anything. So I think the abstract room gives me a sense of community and a sense of discovering the treasures that human beings have left behind for other human beings to discover. But if it's alone, sometimes, see, we do it alone 90% of our times. If we do it with a few people, then that journey of discovering great thoughts and great reflections on our own condition, that becomes a bit more, I would say, easy to digest in a way.
I think that's the perfect way to end this conversation.
Yeah.
And lovely talking to you, Pranav. Namesake में मिलते हैं सीधा.
Awesome, yeah.
Hi, you have reached the end of the conversation. If you enjoyed listening to it and found something useful for yourself, we would request you to check out our other podcast episodes as well. For the time being, they are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other streaming platforms. If you have any feedback for us, please don't hesitate to reach out to us on our Instagram handle, which is mentioned in the description. If you wish to join our community, log on to www.theabstractroom.in and register for our upcoming sessions. In the meantime, we would also request you to please follow or subscribe to our channel depending on the platform you are hearing us on. Anyways, we'll be back soon. See you.